Ukraine's drones have delivered one of the most crippling blows yet inside Russia. Nearly 38% of Moscow's oil refinery capacity has been knocked offline, leaving the Kremlin scrambling to contain the fallout. Explosions, fires, and thick black smoke, these are the latest signs. The war is hitting the core of Russia's economy.
The situation in Russia is deteriorating rapidly. Endless lines, desperate Russians.
He has a flight to catch.
Wow, look over there, right in the middle.
Look, he's gonna bomb. Wow, did you get that?
Yes. Damn! Shit, the shockwave is gonna hit us.
Are you kidding me?
Look at that.
It's all right.
Wow, look at the flames. Wow, look at the flames.
Wow, what the hell?
This is unbelievable.
Refineries on fire, 38% of refining capacity destroyed. But Putin, well, he had a plan B. The refineries are burning, Western sanctions, no problem. China and India were buying everything, and it was working, at least until the 22nd of this month, until Trump did something that completely changed the game. October 22nd, 2025. That date will go down in history as the day Putin's strategy began to fall apart. On that day, the United States Department of the Treasury announced something unprecedented. Two of the largest Russian oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, were placed on the list of specially designated nationals. And if you don't know what that means, let me explain it to you in a very simple way. When a company is put on this list, all its assets in the United States are instantly frozen. No American company can do business with them. Most importantly, any bank, insurance, or transportation company worldwide that deals with these companies runs the risk of facing the same sanctions. It's as if these companies become toxic. Nobody wants to go near them. And here we reach an important point. Because Rosneft and Lukoil are not small companies. They control 40% of all oil production in Russia. Almost half of all Russian oil exports come from these two companies. Putting these giants on the blacklist is like cutting the two main arteries of the Russian economy.
Look, these are tremendous sanctions. They're very big. They're against their two major oil companies. And we hope they don't last long. We hope the war is resolved.
But Trump and his team went even further. They implemented something called the 50% rule. Any subsidiary that is 50% or more controlled by Rosneft or Lukoil is automatically blacklisted as well. And this happens even when it hasn't been mentioned by name. This measure has exponentially expanded the scope of the sanctions. Suddenly, hundreds of smaller companies also became untouchable. Now you might be thinking, but wait a minute. Russia had already been sanctioned for years, right? What's so different this time? Well, the difference here is brutal. The old sanctions worked with a price cap. Basically, the idea was, you can buy Russian oil, but only if you pay less than $60 per barrel. It was an attempt to reduce Putin's profits without taking Russian oil off the market completely. Because if Russian oil suddenly disappeared from the global market, the price of oil would skyrocket, hurting everyone. These new sanctions are completely different. There's no more price cap. There's no more you can buy, but at a discount. Now it's forbidden, period. It's a total blockade. The message is clear. You can't do business with these companies. Not at all. And if you try, you'll be sanctioned too. And here's where the smartest part of the American strategy comes in. They gave a deadline through general licenses. 126 and 127, the United States gave the world exactly 30 days to disconnect from these Russian companies. By November 21st, all companies had to terminate their contracts, cancel their orders, and cut all ties with Rosneft and Lukoil. It was a clear warning. Time is running out. Choose your side now. That's exactly what China and India did. But before you understand why they made that decision, you need to understand the size of the problem this represents for Putin. China buys 47% of all the oil that Russia exports, while India buys 37%. Together, these two countries are responsible for more than 80% of Russia's oil exports. And here's the devastating detail. Of the imports that India receives from Russia, 66% came specifically from these two companies, which have just been sanctioned. In China, between 80 and 90% of Russian imports arrived by ship. Exactly the kind of transportation that depends on Western insurance, Western banks, and Western maritime services. So, when Trump imposed these sanctions, China and India found themselves facing an impossible choice. On one side, cheap Russian oil. On the other side, access to the American market, the dollar-based financial system, the entire economic architecture of the West. And they did their calculations. The Chinese economy depends immensely on exports to the United States. The Indian economy does too. Risking being cut off from the American financial system, risking secondary sanctions, risking losing access to the largest consumer market in the world for a discount on Russian oil, it's not worth it. The response then came quickly. According to Reuters, China's major state-owned oil companies have suspended purchases of Russian oil arriving by ship. In India, refineries like Reliance have announced that they will drastically cut purchases from these two Russian companies. It was a historic turnaround. For the first time since the beginning of the war, Putin's biggest economic allies have turned their backs on him. But here's something you need to understand. Putin is not only being attacked on the financial front, he's being attacked on two fronts at the same time. And it's this combination that's driving the Russian economy to collapse. While the United States is strangling Russian finances, Ukraine is physically destroying Russia's ability to process oil. Since August, Ukrainian drones have been hitting refineries all over Russian territory. 16 out of 38 Russian refineries have already been hit, some of them multiple times. The result? 14% of all of Russia's refining capacity has been destroyed or is out of operation. And here's the crucial connection you need to understand. Putin may have crude oil coming out of the ground, he may have billions of barrels in reserve. But if he can't turn that crude oil into gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, what's the point? The refineries are the bottleneck, and Ukraine is tightening that bottleneck more and more. That's why you see Russians in gas lines. It's not because the oil ran out, it's because the refineries that turn oil into fuel were bombed. It's because the processing capacity was drastically reduced. And with sanctions cutting off Russia's access to Western equipment and technology, fixing these refineries is becoming more and more difficult and expensive. It's expensive. It's a double blow. On one hand, financial sanctions cut off those who buy Russian oil. On the other hand, physical attacks destroy the ability to turn that oil into useful products. It's like tightening a rope around the neck of the Russian economy. The rope keeps getting tighter and tighter, and it becomes harder and harder to breathe. And the Russian people are feeling it firsthand. In occupied Crimea, the government had to implement rationing, only 20 liters of gasoline per person. In several Russian regions, drivers report having to visit 5-6 gas stations before finding fuel. And when they do, the lines can last for hours. A Russian woman filmed her own situation and said something that sums it all up. The Soviet Union is back.
I don't know what to do. There's no gasoline. There's no gasoline at the gas stations, only in some cities. What is this, a Soviet Union or something?
That comparison isn't exaggerated. For those who lived through the Soviet collapse in the late 80s and early 90s, These scenes are eerily familiar. Endless lines, shortages of basic goods, the feeling that the system is failing. And that's one of the worst things that can happen to an authoritarian government. Because you can hide military casualty numbers, you can manipulate economic statistics, but you can't hide a 2-hour line at a gas station. And the numbers show that hope is dying. A recent survey, published by Russian newspapers, showed that only 27% of Russians believe that life will get better in the next 6 to 12 months. In April of this year, that number was 39%. In just a few months, confidence has dropped by half. 2/3 of Russians see no way out and only expect the situation to worsen. But can't Putin do something about this? Doesn't he have a plan C? Well, technically, yes. Putin still has a few tricks up his sleeve. The main one is the so-called Shadow Fleet. It's a network of hundreds of old ships, many of them over 20 years old, that were bought specifically to transport Russian oil. Without relying on Western services, these ships use flags of convenience from countries like Gabon. They turn off their global positioning system tracking systems to disappear from the radar. They do ship-to-ship cargo transfers on the high seas to hide the origin of the oil. Knowing this, Europe has just blacklisted 557 of these ships. Now, they can no longer dock at European ports. Companies that work with these ships risk facing sanctions. And even if some ports in Asia or the Middle East still accept these ships, the risk is getting higher and higher. Putin is also trying to use alternative currencies, mainly the Chinese yuan. The idea is to make transactions outside the dollar system to avoid the reach of American sanctions. And that works up to a certain point. But every layer of complication you add, every extra intermediary, every transaction in a less liquid currency, every questionable ship you use, all of that costs money. All of that reduces the profit margin. To get someone to buy oil using this risky infrastructure, Putin will have to offer bigger and bigger discounts, maybe 20%, maybe 30%, maybe more. And even then, the volume will be smaller. Because fewer people will want to take the risk, fewer banks will want to process the payments, and fewer insurance companies will want to cover the ships. It's like trying to do business with one hand tied behind your back. You can do it, you can. But it's going to be much harder, much more expensive, and much less profitable. And for a country that needs revenue to sustain an expensive war, to pay soldiers, to buy weapons, to keep the economy running, those margins matter a lot. Now, let me tell you something important. These sanctions won't make the Russian economy collapse tomorrow. It's not going to be a dramatic event where suddenly everything stops. That's not how economic warfare works. It's a slow process. It's a war of attrition. Every day, the situation gets a little harder. Every week, the profit margin shrinks a little more. Every month, finding willing buyers gets a little more complicated. It's like that metaphor about the noose around your neck. The rope doesn't kill you instantly, but with every new sanction, every new attack on a refinery, every new country that decides not to take the risk, the noose tightens a little more. And it gets harder and harder for you to breathe. It's getting increasingly difficult to keep things running and pay the costs of war. And there's an important issue here as well. The success of this strategy doesn't depend only on having the right tools. It depends on political will. It depends on active and constant oversight. It depends on the United States and Europe continuing to close loopholes, sanction new intermediaries, track ships from the Shadow Fleet, and keep up the pressure. Putin is betting that the West will get tired, that unity will fragment, that the political costs will become too great, that, over time, people will stop paying attention, and the loopholes will open up again. That's his bet. Resistance, waiting for the other side to give up first. The question isn't whether Russia can get around these sanctions. The question is, At what cost and for how long? Because with each passing day, the price gets higher. With each passing day, it gets harder to keep the soldiers paid, the tanks fueled, and the population at least minimally satisfied. When Trump was asked about Putin's statement that Russia is immune to sanctions, he replied with a smile, "Good for him that he feels that way. I'll tell you in 6 months. Let's see how that's going to work." 6 months. That's the deadline Trump gave.
President Putin basically said today that Russia is immune to the sanctions. He said this wouldn't seriously impact the economy. He's wrong.
I'm glad he feels that way. That's good. I'll tell you about it in 6 months. Let's see how it all works out.
And in the next 6 months, we'll find out if this strategy will work. Will the combination of devastating financial sanctions and physical attacks on refineries be enough to force President Putin to change course? But one thing is already clear. For the first time since the beginning of this war, Putin's economic strategy is visibly failing. His biggest buyers have turned their backs, his people are standing in lines, his politicians are calling the sanctions a declaration of war. And when you see Medvedev, the former Russian president, making aggressive statements about conflict with the United States, you know they're feeling the pressure. The war for Ukraine won't be decided only on the battlefields. It will also be decided in the meeting rooms of Chinese banks, in the offices of Indian refineries, and at Russian gas stations, where ordinary people wait for hours for fuel. And right now, for the first time, Putin is losing on that front. The question now is no longer whether the Russian economy will collapse. The question is when and what Putin is willing to do before that happens. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think China and India will really maintain this position against Russia? Or will they go back to buying Russian oil if Putin offers an even bigger discount? Leave in the comments what you think. If this video helped you understand what's really happening with the Russian economy, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos on this topic. The next one.